Thank you.
Great. The third item, and I'll be done just momentarily, is step where we place young people who have been in very highly restrictive group home settings. So when AB 12 passed, I think of it as a bit of a deal with the devil we made, where we said if you're after age 18, you can't be in a group home. Well, that's great because we don't want anyone in a group home, but we didn't really create a new placement for them. We don't really have a system to step them down into a setting where they are safe and supported. And so we have a lot of THP plus foster care programs struggling to serve these young people mightily. These are young people with serious mental health issues. And so we have to answer that question. We can't abandon these young people.
But how do you also not disserve others in those settings?
Exactly.
That we're making work as a transition.
Mm-hmm. Very fair question. The last one I'll raise is extremely timely. So when AB 12 passed, there was an agreement that was made that the contribution on the part of counties would be capped at the amount that was saved from converting our state KIN-GAP program into the federal KIN-GAP program. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that, but essentially there was a that's kind of the deal that was struck, and the understanding that over time we would see how much was saved through the implementation of the federal subsidized guardianship program, and then that would be the upper watermark for the county investment. Anything after that watermark, the state would chip in. Well, several years later, we are at an impasse, to say the least. The state doesn't think it owes the money. The counties doesn't think it owes the money. And so we are at a place and time where we are seeing potentially young people getting restricted access to care. I believe this issue can be resolved. I think everyone is very committed to this program, but it needs to be resolved in 2016. Because absent the resolution, it leaves our local, county child welfare administrators in a place where they have two terrible options. One option is to restrict access. They don't want to do that. The other option is to, have to use money that was never intended for this program. And so I think your engagement, the engagement of other leaders in foster care could be an essential contribution to moving past this impasse and really getting the program back to where it has been, which is open-ended entitlement.
Yeah, a funded commitment that we're standing behind.
Exactly.
And that the people of California are so committed to supporting these kids.
And that's where we've been, and that is what has led. So we don't want to let important initiatives like CCR say, well, that's the new thing. Extended foster care is the past. We're going to renege on that funding obligation. That was a commitment that was made by the legislature and the administration. We want to keep it whole. We want to keep it strong as we move forward with additional initiatives. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share this information. It's extremely important to the John Burton Foundation, and we're happy to support this work in any possible way moving forward.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your going through the issues of the Chafee grants, this needed home alternative option for kids stepping down, the financial commitment, that it's not a capitated program, that there's an entitlement, that we need to support these kids, sort of continue that work. Any comments on the going beyond age 21, that issue, expanding foster care beyond age 21?
At the risk of getting struck down, I believe our highest priority right now is the strong, full, and complete implementation of the program we have. There are other challenges that certainly could be highlighted. I think the program we have for youth past age 21, THP Plus, is absolutely at risk It was realigned in 2011, and unfortunately, we are seeing some counties begin to opt out of the program. So I would argue that the focus for those older youth, it's an excellent program. It gets very strong outcomes. Let's strengthen the existing program we have for young people over 21 and under 21, and then do that for a while, and then potentially revisit that. I know that on the federal level, there is potentially some appetite for using our child welfare system to think about homelessness among unaccompanied minors and young adults. And I think that could be an interesting conversation here to have in California. To date, these issues have been very bifurcated, even though they're very closely related. We know homeless youth are maltreated at high rates, up to 60%, and many of them are just young people who remove themselves from the home before our system identifies them. So I think there's a lot of potential kind of integration between those sectors when appropriate.
And it may happen that rather like in the era when AB 12 passed originally, when the demographics of homes was changing, and therefore you see that there's a need to do something better to deal with the changed situation in households, maybe we start reevaluating that 21 boundary in light of changing circumstances. So just keep focused on the current program and work on our data that may help us understand some of these older kids' needs. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Amy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we now have Nate Okpich, who has been doing studies looking at youth at age 17, 19, and ultimately 21. So getting some longitudinal studies in the lives of specific kids within the system. So you talk to them at 17, and then you get an update at 19 and an update in 2 years at 21. And so this is a very important study looking at the implementation of policies here in California. So Nate, thank you for being here, and I'll let you take it away.
All right, great. Thank you, Chairman Cooley. It's an honor to be part of this very important session. I also want to thank Ms. Lemley. She did a great job summarizing extended foster care. Made my job a little easier. So my name, again, is Nathaniel Okpich, and I'm a doctoral student at the University of Chicago, and I'm also the current project director of the California Youth Transitions to Adulthood study, which we call CalYouth. And part of my job today is actually 2 weeks ago we released a pretty lengthy report of how youth in our study were faring at age 19. In the study community, we lovingly called it the Beast, because it's about 180 pages. So today I'm going to be hitting some of the highlights from that study. And at the end of the presentation, I'll take a look at, show some outcomes between youth who are in care and youth who left care at the time of the study. And then finally, we also received some input from caseworkers, and I'll be highlighting some areas of greatest need for services, both from the youth's perspective, but also from the caseworker's perspective. All right. So before I get started, I just want to quickly summarize what the CalYouth study is about. The overriding purpose is to evaluate the impact of extended foster care in California on the outcomes for foster youth in the state. And when we say evaluate, it's not just is it good, is it bad, is it working, is it not. We really want to try to understand if it is working, how it's working, and also understand the implementation of the law so that we could better improve it in the future. We're coming upon a part of the study where from here moving forward, we'll really be getting some good, rich data to be able to do that. So in order to answer this question, we're collecting information really from three main sources. The first source is an analysis of state administrative data. So we have child welfare records of youth in foster care back from 2006 up until 2015, and we'll be updating that database in the next couple months. And so what we have is all youth who are in foster care in California from age 16 and above. Some of these youth were in care before AB 12 passed. somewhere in care after AB 12 passed. And what we'll be doing is we'll be linking these youth to a number of data sets, state administrative data, that will be able to tell us about their earnings, their employment, education, criminal justice involvement, use of public assistance.
Get, in effect, an array of metrics.
Yes.
You can sort of relate to this population.
Exactly.
So sort of helping to just measure by a variety of different criteria what's going on in the population.
That's right.
And then start looking for meaning, significance.
That's right.
Implications.
Yeah, and this data will really give us the big overriding picture. This is the bird's eye view. This will help us to answer the question, is extended foster care successful? Because we will have basically all youth in foster care in this analysis. We haven't received most of the data yet.
I prefer to think of it as how we will be able to improve it.
That's even
we
better.
will conclude it successful, but we may yet have a growing edge for California and the country.
I like the way you put it better. And so we'll be getting that data most likely this summer. So we'll be starting to get going with the analyses then. The two other parts of the study are closer to the ground, and we get a much more nuanced and detailed picture of both youth in foster care in California, but also their caseworkers who work with these youth. So the second part of the study is a longitudinal study of young people in California foster care. We took a representative sample of young people back in 2013. So these were youth who were between the ages of 16 and 3/4 and 17 and 3/4 who were in foster care for at least 6 months. And they were in child welfare supervised foster care. They weren't the youth in probation supervised foster care. And we conducted an interview with these youth back in 2013 when most youth were 17 years old. And our response rate was 95%. We talked to about 730 young people. And then just last year, we re-interviewed these youth. We were able to talk to about 84% of the youth that we originally talked to a couple years ago. So we have data on the youth now at age 19. And this is predominantly what I'm going to be sharing today. And then the third part of this study involves two surveys of caseworkers who are serving non-minor dependents. We conducted one survey in 2013, and then a second survey just recently in 2015. And I have a little bit of data that I'll be sharing with from that survey. Okay. So here comes the run-through of boiling down the beast to a quick summary. If we take a look at education. Education is really important. When we interviewed the youth at age 17, about 90% said that they aspired to earn a college degree or higher. So a lot of these young people have high hopes in terms of education. When we look at how they're doing at age 19, we see that about 70% of the young people had a high school diploma or equivalency certificate. So there's still about 30% that had not yet attained those credentials. And we see that about a little bit over half of the youth were currently enrolled in school. So when we take a look at the types of schools that youth were enrolled in, about 25% of the youth were either in high school or pursuing their GED. But by and large, about 60% of the youth who were enrolled in college, mostly two-year colleges. So they were working towards their goal. If we take a look at employment, about 1 in 3 youth were currently employed at the time of the interview. Slightly more youth were employed part-time than full-time. One of the ways that this statistic could be misleading is youth may not be working because they're in school. So when we looked at just the youth who are not in school, about 40% were currently employed. The average hourly wage was $10.21, which is a little bit above the state minimum wage. And then when we asked the youth more broadly if they had worked in the past year and received income from their employment, close to 60% said that they had received income in the past year. And the average amount of income that the youth received was a little bit over $6,000. All right, so another, as Amy mentioned, another important part of extended foster care is that new housing placements were created under the law. When we asked the youth, so youth in care and youth out of care have different options. So what I'm going to do is I'll present the housing situations of youth in care and out of care separately. First, we'll take a look at youth in care. And this constitutes about 3/4 of the youth from our baseline sample. So about 3/4 were still in care at the time of their second interview, when they were about 19 years old. Now, just as a note, among those youth who were in care, about 20% of the youth had left care and then returned. So this just speaks to Amy's point about the importance of being able to leave and come back. So when we take a look at the most common placements, about 50% of the youth were either in supported independent living placement or transitional housing placement, which are the youth-friendly places that Ms. Lemley mentioned earlier. There's also a sizable proportion of youth who are living in the foster home with a relative, and also youth living in a foster home of an unrelated foster parent. These were the most common living placements. So when we turn to youth who are living out of care, we see that a good number of the youth are living with relatives. This includes birth parents, but also other extended family. Some youth also reported they were living on their own. About 1 in 5 youth were living in their own place. And also about 10% of youth were living with their spouse or their partner. And then the rest of the placements were less common. So at this age, as youth are
Can we back up just for a moment in that
Sure.
slide? So in Home of Friends, is that sort of couch surfing, or you just have roommates? What do you think that was?
So this is not so much couch surfing. This is more like living with a peer or a friend.
Roommates, yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and about 4.3% of the youth said that they were currently homeless at the time of the interview. The youth out of care.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Nate.
All right, so at age 19, as youth are living on their own and becoming more independent, one of the things that becomes more prevalent are instances of economic hardship and food insecurity. So basically not having enough money and going hungry. So we asked youth a number of questions about different economic hardships they faced and different types of food insecurity that they faced in the past 12 months. And we see that just under 20% of youth said that in the past 12 months, they didn't have enough money to pay rent at some point. 20% of youth said that they didn't have enough money to pay for utility bills. And for food insecurity, I present 2 measures here. Just about 1 in 10 youth said that they did not eat for a whole day because they couldn't afford food. And about 1 in 3 youth said that when they ran out of food, they weren't able to replace food because they didn't have enough money. So there is some hardship. And as I discussed later, youth who are out of care were more likely to experience these hardships than in-care youth. Social support is also another really important area. Like all young people at this age, foster care youth need to have people in their lives that they could rely on for support and for resources. So we have a pretty elaborate instrument for asking about social support. These are just some of the highlights. We asked about 3 different types of social support. Emotional support, you can think about it as having someone to talk to when you have about personal issues or a personal problem. Tangible support is if you have someone to go to when you need something, such as something practical like to borrow money or need a ride in a car. Advice guidance is having people to turn to when you need information or when you need help making a decision. And what we see in this figure is that for each of the 3 types of supports, most of the youth said that they had enough people to turn to for each of the types of supports, but a non-trivial proportion of youth said that they had too few people or no one to rely on for these types of supports. That was particularly true for tangible support. Youth were more likely to say that they had too few people or no one to count on than the other types of support. So we also asked youth to estimate how many people they actually had to turn to for each of these types of supports. It could range from 0 up until 99. Some youth had 99 people. But on average, youth said they had close to 4.5 people to turn to for emotional support, and about 3 people in their lives they could turn to for tangible support, and 3 for advice and guidance. Criminal justice involvement, we asked about their interaction with the criminal justice system since the baseline interview, which is about a 2-year span. About 15% said that they were arrested, less than 10% said that they were convicted of a crime, and slightly over 10% said that they spent a night in a jail or a prison. All right, so this slide represents some early evidence on extended foster care. And I just want to just say a word of caution. These results should be regarded with some caution because we haven't accounted for pre-existing differences between in-care youth and out-of-care. This is just looking at youth, how they're faring right now. Once we dig into the data, we will definitely do that. But across the board, what we see is that in-care youth generally fared better than youth who left care. Here are just a few examples. So when we look at the proportion of youth who were either enrolled in school or working, close to 80% of youth in care were in school or working, or both. Only 50% of youth who are out of care were in school or working. In terms of food insecurity, this is the measure that I mentioned before about going homeless because they didn't have enough money for food. Youth out of care were more likely than in-care youth to say that they experienced this in the past 12 months. Similarly, youth who are out of care were more likely to be arrested in the past 2 years, and they were also more likely to experience homelessness in the past 2 years. About 1 in 3 youth out of care said that they were homeless at some point. And homelessness means living in a place for a night or more that is not designed for people to live. Okay, so we asked a number of questions about youth's attitudes about extended care. So these are the youth who are in care. And what we see is that in general, youth felt that extended foster care was helping them. And there was a sizable proportion that said extended care was helping them a lot in helping them reach their goals of becoming more independent, so living on their own, reaching their education goals, also employment goals, but a little bit less high than the other two that we measured. And then about half of the youth in care said that their caseworker was helping them a lot in meeting their goals overall in extended foster care. All right, so finally, to get at the areas of greatest service need, we asked youth in their survey, what are the areas that you feel the least prepared in? And then in the caseworker survey, which was also administered in 2015, we asked them to report about youth that have high needs of services. What areas are the youth that have the highest needs of services? And we see that there's some agreement between them. Housing is a big issue, both in terms of availability of housing options, but also appropriateness of housing options. Financial literacy is also an important point. So this is paying bills on time, budgeting, learning about debt, things like that. Education, even though youth were happy with the services they received, and caseworkers said that there was actually a lot of education services, this is still an area of great need, both identified by the youth and the caseworkers. One area of disagreement is the youth said that employment was an area that they were still struggling with, and they weren't fully prepared. And the caseworkers said parenting among those youth who did parent. All right, so that's all that I have. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Now, as you've looked at California and compared to other states, is there anything that stands out that other states are doing great that we might learn from? Any sort of comparison of California to other states as you're doing your research?
Sure. So we're just starting to enter conversations with other states. There are some states, it's a very small number, such as Illinois and New York, that actually had extended foster care on the books for quite a number of years beforehand. And one of the things that they're seeing is they're actually having some difficulties because they're backing into the extended foster care law. And in a sense, they're looking to California and other states that have to start it anew. What we see within California, because since California is a county-administered child welfare system, there are some differences between counties in terms of administration. So, for example, there are some counties that have caseworkers that work exclusively with transition-age youth. So they're working with adolescents preparing to enter care and those who are in extended foster care. In other counties, it's a mixed bag. You have a caseworker that one day they'll see an infant who's in foster care, then in the afternoon they'll see someone in extended care. And we suspect that the counties that have those specialized units are just going to have more capital, more skills, and more resources to really devote to the older youth. That's our hope, at least. Mm-hmm.
And I know you're working through the data and drilling down and that sort of thing. Is there anything that has really struck you already as you think about the data? I mean, you kind of went through it. Just as you've looked at it, is there anything that really stands out?
Sure.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I didn't mention, but that did stand out is, so when we looked at the youth who were in care at 19, and we separated them out between the youth who said they stayed in care since we first interviewed them, and those youth that left care, tried to do it on their own, and then came back. The youth who left care and came back actually look more like the youth who left care in terms of things like food insecurity and homelessness. So a lot of these youth, and when we asked other questions about their reasons for leaving care, a lot of these youth said that they wanted to be on their own, they wanted more freedom. Some of them said that they weren't happy with the court systems or their caseworker. Some of them wanted to live with partners. But in any case, they tried to do it on their own, and what we see is that they ran into some pretty steep obstacles in terms of becoming homeless, economic hardships. So I think what I'm really interested in is when we collect data when the youth are age 21, do these youth rebound, right? Now that they're in care, if they stay in care, do they rebound and homelessness goes down and financial instability goes down? That's one of the, I mean, if this is for all youth. If you have a youth that's 18, 19 years old and basically say you're on your own, there really isn't a fallback. A lot of times you're going to run into some pretty severe obstacles. And that was one of the findings that I think was most interesting to me so far.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to get to Alexis here in a moment, and I want to say thank you for your presentation. And I'm going to tell you, Alexis, if you heard anything in his presentation you'd like to ask some questions, you're going to have a chance to do it if you'd like. Amy, did you hear anything there that you'd like to ask a question, just since we're all here together? Anything that struck you, any comment you want to make? Just taking advantage of us all sitting here together with my subject matter experts, which is what I was reviewing with Alexis before the thing.
Well, I have read The Beast twice, and I encourage everyone who wants some light night reading to do so. It is really just so full of amazing information. It's an amazing complement. You know, we want to hear from young people and talk to them, and it also collects information we would likely never be able to collect, including, so I guess that is one, is just to encourage people to read it. I think it will be interesting moving forward to look at the comparison between the young people who exit and don't exit, and if their kind of underlying characteristics explain away the major differences in their experiences, or if it doesn't. And I guess the point I would make is all of these studies compare young people with a comparison group from the general population. And so my point of view is, if we can compare young people who've had a very distinct traumatic experience with the general population, we can certainly compare them with young people who simply opted out of care. So they have a lot in common with those young people who opted out of care, and when we see these powerful differences in outcomes, that really speaks to me. And I think in some ways, even as I'll own this myself, we become extremely honed at understanding what is wrong about policies, and there is so much. I mean, the list that I highlighted, I could have quadrupled it. But in a climate where this program is having some funding issues, how do we work together to focus on what's working? Because in an environment of very scarce public resources, it'll be hard to resolve that funding issue. Harder if we don't have some level of consensus around some part of this policy is delivering value both to the young people and to California taxpayers. So that's less of a question, but more of a comment as I look at the study. But I celebrate the University of Chicago Chapin Hall. They've moved us so far forward, first with their Midwest study and now with this, and just want to thank them for that. It's excellent work.
Very good. Did you see anything, Alexis, that interested you or struck you?
Not in particular, but I'd like to read The Beast, so I'm going to ask for a copy after.
It was interesting seeing just youth talking about the importance of having a few people they turn to for emotional support,
Right.
intangible support, and advice and guidance. In your own life, do you think about that, the people you could turn to for those things?
I do, and it heavily impacts me daily. So.
Okay, very good. Well, Nate, thank you very much. Thank you for coming and sharing, and thank you for that ongoing work. I think the longitudinal aspect of that is, I've got to think that 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, when you started conceptualizing this study, there was probably conversations about how hard that would be and the challenges of sustaining that type of examination of the outworking of public policy. And so I do want to thank you for that. That's pretty remarkable. I mean, it's a good study design, a very impressive study design, and one that would really intended to shed light that is substantive on very important questions, and not just doing it on the basis of anecdote. And I'm just thinking that's pretty, take back to your colleagues how impressed and impressive the design is, and what a gift to the people of California that struggle with these issues. Very impressive. So I thank you for that.
Thank you.
So then we now have Alexis Berries, who served as, she followed me for a day and found me exceedingly elusive. So I'm so grateful to have her here today.